I'm insanely excited for Doug and Isaiah. Let's break down the Gators softball squad. And are you kidding me? Utah could be leaving the Big 12 before their journey even starts for the fledgling and flailing ACC.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on X at AllDayOState. Today, we get to jump off into the conversation about a Utah. No, not the typical conversation about how Utah fan base has riled everybody up and made everybody somewhat uncomfortable in their Big 12 presence. But this is in regards to the fact that Utah supposedly is exploring their options to potentially leave the Big 12 for the ACC. Now, first of all, let's break down potentially why this could make sense. Well, it's not the right terminology. Let's break down maybe why they would, right? And the reason being is because the Utah Utes definitely see themselves as better than the Big 12. We've known that for quite some time before they're ever even invited to the Big 12. We heard so many negative connotations in regards to the truck stop conference, and we don't want to be a part of that, And let's face it, y'all, we don't exactly line up in Big 12 country with everything that Utah likely does or sometimes doesn't do. So there's going to be some discrepancies there, of course. But the pretentiousness out of Utah fan base before they even got the invite to the Big 12 was maddening so much so that it is kind of encapsulated the desire for everybody in the Big 12 to get a taste of Utah. All of the talking and all of the presenting, the bravado, the peacocking that we've seen out of Utah is going to make this season for them very, very interesting. It would make it more interesting if we were to find out that this is going to be their one and only year in the Big 12 or maybe 2 years in the Big 12. The ACC, they could use this. This could be massively beneficial to them, as they're obviously still kind of dealing with a bunch of craziness in their own conference, trying to keep the thing together. If you added somebody like a Utah, it would, I think, garner more secure solidification, I guess would be the right word, for that conference. So let's flip it in reverse. Why would this not happen? Well, I don't think there's any way in God's purple earth this happens, because Utah's not stupid. Yes, pretentious. Yes, they're stuffy and bougie and think they're better than everybody else. Sure, that might be applicable. But what is not applicable is complete stupidity, which is precisely why they're in the Big 12. Yeah, they puffed their chest out for a while and pretended that they wanted no desire to be in the Big 12. But they also know that the Titanic of the Pac-12 was sinking, and they had to jump onto something. The Big 12 was the best, most logical life raft at the moment. And now you're hearing about this ACC stuff, but the ACC is hanging on by a thread. So I don't think Utah would be dumb enough to leave a conference that's clearly in a position of power when it comes to retention of at least 3 conferences, compared to the conference where you have a bunch of members trying to get out of the conference, or at least trying to get some new negotiations and different tier rights. That's another reason why I don't think Utah would even entertain this idea. If there's ever going to be any tiering system in the ACC for your Florida States and your Miami type of schools, then it kind of cuts the legs out of Utah. Not to say that Utah couldn't get the upper echelon of whatever they're discussing, but nonetheless, I think this is ridiculous. This is 100% posturing. Right? We were at the forefront when this channel started, like week 1, in discussions of the Pac-12 falling apart and which teams would likely join the Big 12. That ended up being precisely the lay of the land, even though you'd seen a bunch of Pac-12 media people like Tony Altimore and the Monty Show and some of those individuals spewing that anybody covering that the Pac-12 is going to fall apart and there's going to be members leave for the Big 12 doesn't know what they're talking about. They called us Big 12 and on and this and that and the other. So for us in the Big 12 and on community, we would like to expand this thing by saying that the ACC has a better chance of having teams join the Big 12 than any member of the Big 12 leaving for the ACC point blank period. You can take it to the bank and you can cash that in. It's just a ridiculous notion. All this is more posturing from the ACC folks to get more leverage, to have more capabilities, to get you ESPN or somebody else to financially step up to the table. Florida State wants out, and Miami seemingly wants out. Those are your two big heavy hitters for the most part in that conference. All right, North Carolina may not be super happy. NC State, they can do whatever they want. But the Big 12 is likely to absorb, I would say, 4 more ACC schools by the time this whole thing is said and done. Now, eventually, right, it does appear as though it'll get to the 2-division thing. But in the meantime, it looks like they're going to cut it down to possibly 3 conferences. It's going to be the Big 10, the SEC, and the Big 12. The ACC does not take any kind of shape to be that 3rd conference. Utah knows that. So as much as the ACC wants to present that this is a possibility, and as much as Utah fans would like to, run around peacocking, pretending that they're too good for the Big 12, and maybe they would be a better fit in the ACC, that is just them knowing that they would most likely run the ACC. That's it. They think they're going to run things in the Big 12. We'll see how that goes. Thus far, in small sample size, right? I know football guides a lot, but all the other sports, Utah, to my knowledge, hasn't done anything. Now, with their football season on the verge of becoming a thing, I do believe that all of this ACC nonsensical conversations, it could drive a little bit more animosity, especially if Utah fans continuously prop up the idea that they'd rather be in the ACC than the Big 12. Luckily, the fans don't make the decisions, or at least the fans that don't exactly know the pulse of what's best for their university. Going to the ACC, sure, it'd be easier. You'd win more games. Absolutely. But what would be the point of joining a conference that's barely hanging on when you just left a conference that went through the same thing? The Big 12 has the exact opposite. We have stability, which is precisely what the ACC doesn't have. We have stability. We have parity. We have exclusive contracts for our coverage of TV viewership. We have the only pro rata clause to get more money if you add more Power 5 schools. Some of these ACC schools that we could potentially bring in would be just that. So it would be more money for the Big 12, not less money, like some tend to, to get somewhat confused by. That if you add more teams, then it's going to be more of a split revenue, which to some degree it is. But we also have the contract that provides us more opportunities to get more money for every single Power 5 team we bring in. Power 4 now, about to be a Power 3. Utah's not dumb enough to go be part of a conference that's in 4th place, knowing that we're probably going to get down to 3. And then it even might get down to 2 in the next 6, 7, 8 years. But in the time being, you're talking about the Big 3. And that includes the Big 12, not the ACC. Utah, their fans might be very pretentious, obnoxious, and annoying, but the people who make the decisions are not completely stupid, which is why they joined the Big 12 in the first place. I don't think they're willing to jump off the life raft that has been provided for them by Brett Yormark for something that has already got holes in it and is bound to sink eventually. All right. Now we'll shift gears here a bit to the softball World Series as we take on the 4th seed Florida Gators. The 4th seed Florida Gators against the 5th seed Oklahoma State Cowgirls. Before we do that, I got to remind the fine folks out here, it's money-making season. And now's the time for you to get in on the action. With FanDuel, right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any $5 winning bet. Do not miss out on this opportunity to bring home your biggest W of the year, whether it be for NBA, NHL. Right now, New customers get that 150 bones back that you can use to then bet on money lines, player props, point spreads, over, under, Heisman's, who's going to win the NBA title, who's going to win the NHL title, and of course, much, much more. Make sure that you make every single playoff shot count for your account. Go to FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Go there today to get squared away on your money-making journey. All right, so let's do a little softball preview here. As we had mentioned previously, the stories kind of write themselves, right? Tim Walton, Kenny Gajewski played baseball together in college in the Big 12 at the school we do not speak of. And then Tim Walton takes his talents to softball. It ends up being amazing. He brings Kenny Gajewski in. They go on some runs. They win a couple national titles. And then Kenny Gajewski comes to Oklahoma State. And since then, he's kind of been at the forefront of this. You can't really call it a rivalry, right? Because they're close. They're buddies. They get along. They don't necessarily love playing each other. But the last 3 trips we've made to play Florida in 2019, 2020, we won both of those games. And then earlier this year, we were at the Clearwater, Florida Invitational, and there's a couple weather snafus. So basically, Kenny called Tim and said, hey, do you want to play a game? No, we're not scheduled, but we are in the area, and we can't play on these fields, yada, yada. One thing led to another. They did an impromptu game, which the Cowgirls won 3-0 earlier on this year. But whenever you look at the comparisons between Oklahoma State and Florida, one of the first things you could potentially look at before we dive into the statistics of it all is the All-Americans. Of course, they're the 4 seed, we're the 5 seed. So why are they above us a little bit in that department? Well, that would be because of the All-Americans. We all know Oklahoma State has 3 All-Americans, highlighted by the all-star pitcher and Lexi Kilfoyle. When you look at Florida, Florida wins that battle again. They have 4 All-Americans. They have a shortstop in Skylar Wallace that is absolutely deadly. And then they also have a catcher that is the best catcher in America. And we know that because she won the award for the Defender of the Year, and Jocelyn Erickson. She's been responsible for 13 people getting gunned down all year. There's only been, I think, 6 or 7 people that have ever stolen on her. So that's going to be very difficult to contend with. And in the outfield, they've got Kendra Falvey. Kendra Falvey can cover a lot of ground, and she's got a very, very good bat. And then on the mound, they're led by freshman Keegan Rothrook. Keegan Rothrook has a 2.43 ERA, which isn't necessarily going to, blow you out of the water when it comes to, impressions. But when you take into consideration what their catcher does, that makes all the difference. Jocelyn Erickson has been the individual that has led this very, very young Florida pitching staff to get them where they are now. This is a matchup that I know that we should be ready for. Now, when you hit the statistical side of things, when you look at the top 10 for the SEC, when it comes to batting averages, Florida literally has half of the top 10. 5 Florida Gators are in the top 10 of the SEC's batting average. They're highlighted by 449. And then Skylar Wallace, that we just mentioned at shortstop, has a 471. And then you go down to Jocelyn Erickson, the catcher we just talked about. She's batting 383. Reagan Walsh, 373. And then Kendra Falvey, 372. So from a batting average perspective, they're going to be able to do some things that are going to keep us on our heels. And then it gets even better whenever you look at the SEC team statistics. Guys, it is absolutely wild. Number 1 in the SEC in batting average. One in total bases, number 1 in plate appearances, number 1 in walk, number 2 in hits by pitch, number 1 in sac flies, number 1 in stolen bases, number 1 in steal attempts. So 80% of all SEC statistical categories, Florida is the top of the heap in. So even though we've won our last 3 matchups against this Tim Walton Florida Gator softball club, they're riding high, and they've got more All-Americans. When you look across the board from a batting average perspective, They do a lot. We've got some very solid people, but like we just mentioned, somebody that maybe should have been an All-American that isn't quite there is Talon Edwards. And Talon Edwards, statistically, doesn't do some of the same things that the Florida girls do. And we are talking about the SEC. Now, the Big 12 is kind of one of the juggernauts in softball, but nonetheless, if you're able to navigate that schedule and produce this kind of results, you're going to be pretty squared away. And now we get to face a pitcher with a 2.42 ERA who has 186 or 168 punch outs. This is not going to be the same trip as the last few. Now, this has become some sort of a rivalry. It's a friendly rivalry. This is the matchup that should validate precisely where we are in this World Series. I think the matchup earlier this year that we won 3-0 is not necessarily indicative of what this final outcome is going to be. A, that was a long time ago. And B, we haven't necessarily seen an overabundance of teams that hit with the capability of these Florida Gators. Now, I am predicting a W, all right, simply because their pitching staff isn't what ours is, right? I think I'll put it in perspective. Kyra Aycock, who's our number 3, I think would be their number 2 and would potentially have a crack at starting. Now, I don't think that this is me throwing any sort of shade whatsoever at their pitching staff, right? But Kagan Rothcock is good, but after her, I don't know that they have enough. Because we know that if Lexi is struggling, not that there's very many people in the country that are anywhere near Lexi Kilfoyle, but even if she is struggling, Ivy Rosenberry would be able to come in and stem the tide, most likely, to get this W. So seeing Kagan versus Lexi is going to be worth its weight in gold. But seeing Lexi versus their lineup, that's the matchup. That's the key. And we've got to be able to drop bombs. Thankfully, we're not a team that does a lot of dink and dunking in softball, right? We're not going to small ball you to death. We're not going to piece you up like we would have maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Now we're a squad that can drop bombs all the way up and down the lineup. So I am predicting a W, but I also predict that it'll be somewhat reminiscent of our last trip, but I don't think the score will be the same. We won last game 3-0. I figure we probably win this game 4-3, 3-2, right around that range. We should be able to put up some runs, but they're going to be able to hit the ball pretty effectively as well. And they've got somebody with 14, 15 bombs. So they've got a Carly Godwin that they can turn to. They've got a Michaela Warwick that could potentially use. They've got a solid outfield. They've got an all-American shortstop that can do both the defensive side and she adequately can bat. So this is going to be fun. I do predict a dub. All right. And we get to move on. And Coach Kenny Gajewski and the Tim Walton extravaganza gets to move on to a later date. All right. Before we skedaddle on out of here, I'm sure you guys have all seen Isaiah Miranda has taken his talents to Green Bay to play for Doug Gottlieb. And the irony here is, right, in some of my many conversations with Doug, of course, Isaiah Miranda is going to be a popular topic. And one of the biggest things that I was able to take in different conversations about Isaiah Miranda is the talent has never been in question, right? That's why he was a very heralded big-time 4-star get for NC State, comes to Oklahoma State, doesn't really end up seeing the floor much, and then he's just gone. And one of the biggest common consensus about Isaiah Miranda is NBA-level talent. Just sometimes he doesn't always find the motivation to get out of his own way, right? And this isn't necessarily it just in my conversations with Doug. This is with some other people that have been around and that have been around him and have been on the court when he's been playing multiple games at the high school level and even had some capabilities to go watch some NC State live stuff. And the common consensus was if somebody can kind of pull the inner love of dedication of working out of him, he's an NBA level guy. And I think this is a pretty good sign for Doug that Isaiah Miranda believes in Doug Gottlieb. Isaiah Miranda believed in Doug Gottlieb before he came to Oklahoma State, but obviously they were able to bridge that gap even more so. And this is a risk for Doug, right? I mean, Doug's not unintelligent. He does know that if he's the guy that pulls the inner I want to go to work, go to war, lunch pail mentality out of Isaiah Miranda, it will transcend him as a coach and Isaiah as a player. And let's face it, this makes Green Bay a legitimate candidate to make the NCAA tournament year one. Now, this isn't even necessarily taking into consideration the returning guys that they have or the season that they had previously. But Isaiah Miranda is a difference maker in the Big 12. Isaiah Miranda is a difference maker in the ACC. So if he can find it in himself to make sure that he's on the court every minute of every single day, this catapults him so high. And it does so much for Green Bay. He is that good. He's that good to take you to the tournament. And I honestly believe that Doug is that guy, right? He's the guy that can have a direct conversation with Isaiah and get him to buy into a level that he hasn't bought in yet. Not at Oklahoma State, not at NC State, not coming out of high school. Guys, if Isaiah Miranda does find that love for being up at 4:30 every day and working his tail off, if he finds that, Doug Gottlieb has himself an NBA dude right here, right now in Green Bay. I'm super pumped. And guys, we might as well enjoy this ride because we are going to check in with Doug. Doug's going to join the program again, and we're going to talk about the decision-making process for him and kind of how it worked out. But if you haven't seen his introduction press conference at Green Bay, I implore you to go check it out. Obviously, he talked about Oklahoma State a lot and Eddie Sutton and his ability to get guys to believe in a little bit more. Now he has Isaiah Miranda. If Isaiah Miranda believes in himself enough, this is going to do massive things. And then we get to watch Green Bay in the NCAA tournament. We hopefully make it as well, of course, yes. But I'm cheering for Doug. I think most of you are as well. And realistically, the biggest knock on Doug Gottlieb to ever take over at Oklahoma State was the fact that he didn't have college coaching experience as a head man. Now he goes to Green Bay as the head man. And then he gets Isaiah Miranda. If he takes Green Bay to the NCAA tournament in year one, I do think that begins at least to answer the questions or the concerns that any Oklahoma State fans have about if Doug Gottlieb is going to be able to do it at this level. I can't wait to see what Steve Lutz does. I'm all on board for Steve Lutz, which is why we were calling for Steve Lutz to get the job months ago. But if Lutz didn't get the job, you knew Doug Gottlieb was somebody that I thought would be able to re-galvanize the love for Oklahoma State basketball and the love for traveling to catch games in Galgaraba again. But Steve Lutz is well on his way to doing the exact same thing. I think Doug is well on his way to bringing this Green Bay club to the NCAA tournament, if not year one, year two, year three, pretty daggone quick. I don't think it's going to take Doug a long time to get this thing off the ground up there. All righty, y'all. Reckon that's all we're going to have for this one right here. As always, you know I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here in Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Do me a favor. Doesn't cost you nothing. Hit the daggone like button. More importantly, share, comment, and subscribe as we're getting squared away and set up for this epic football season. My podcast and people out there, you are the bread, the butter, the bricks, the foundation. Do what you do. Hit the reviews. Leave the stars. All righty, y'all. Later, taters.